Hey, so I'm Thomas. I'm 17. I'm in year 12, so I'm finishing high school this year. And for as long as I can remember, really, I've always been interested in music. Uh, when I was 3 or 4, I think I started learning keyboard, and then when I was 9, started piano. Around the same time, I started learning cello, and since then, I'm a self-taught drummer and bassist. But in all honesty, I think for the longest time as well, I've been more interested in listening and writing to music than performing it. And that's certainly something I want to pursue in the future. So back when I was learning keyboard, I was even when I was 4 or 5, I was very interested in film music. And one distinct thing I can remember is that after seeing Beetlejuice, which is a film from the late 80s with a great Danny Elfman score, I remember going to the keyboard and like pressing the brass button and trying to figure out how to play the theme from that. So film music is especially something that I'm interested in and I want to pursue. So growing up, I watched a lot of Harry Potter and Star Wars, Superman, all of which have got great John Williams scores, and that sort of made me quite interested in that orchestral sound palette. But at the same time, I've also been interested in bands like Queen and the Beatles for ages as well. So I've got quite a wide range of influences, things that interest me. I think the first time that my interest in film music actually turned into something practical was in 2014. I was in year 6, so it would have been about 12 or 13, if I remember correctly. And I was with my friends. We wanted to make this sort of silly adventure film, this almost Indiana Jones spoof thing. And we spent ages thinking about it, talking about it. And one of the things I thought would be good is if I wrote my own little score, with a full orchestra. So I made my own sort of stave paper and wrote out a score for an orchestra. We never ended up finishing the film. It was one of those things where we'd always talk about it and say, oh, this would be a great idea, but we never got around to filming it. But throughout that whole process, I kind of discovered how much I enjoyed writing music with like a functional purpose in mind, especially. And that sort of switched me on and made me realize, whereas previously I was like, oh, I want to be a movie star or something. That was the moment where I realized, oh, maybe I could pursue composing as a career or something, as a vocation. So since then, I've become more interested in like the technical production side of music. I'm very interested in sampling and digital audio workstations, because as a young person, especially now, we don't have access to orchestras. Even before COVID shut everything down, you can't commission an orchestra when you're a 17-year-old working out of your bedroom. So I've collected a lot of samples of orchestras, just individual notes, and I'm quite interested in that technological side. And so that's something I'm also very interested in pursuing. So for my fanfare, the main influence for this one was sci-fi films. I called it Fanfare for the Frontier, only because I thought if I said Fanfare for the Final Frontier, I'd probably get sued by whoever owns Star Trek. So it's the image I wanted to evoke when I wrote it was the imagery of leaving Earth's atmosphere or going off into some faraway place. I wanted to capture that sense of adventure. And for me, I linked that to sci-fi, but I tried to write it in a way where it wasn't too focused on that. And to do that, I incorporated 2 different specific inspirations, which I'll touch on a bit later. But perhaps now I'll play the fanfare that I've written. I'll try and share my screen and hope this doesn't stuff it up. Let's see. Can you see that? That is, I'll just clear up some stuff here. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just play it from here.
Lines and lines and lines and lines.
Yeah, this is I wrote the fanfare on this program, and then I sort of transposed it into a score, working with the samples just because I find it easier rather than like working with MIDI sounds. Anyway, here's the fanfare. So that was my fanfare there. I mentioned earlier that I had two main influences, so I'll touch on them briefly. So the first one, it's almost a cliche to say now, but I think for a lot of people my age who are interested in music, especially orchestral music, John Williams was that sort of starting point where we started to notice that music isn't just like something in the background; it's its own art. So beyond John Williams, I really like the music of Bernard Herrmann, who was a composer who worked from the 40s right until the mid 70s. And he's best known for composing films, some of the scores for Alfred Hitchcock, uh, Vertigo, North by Northwest are some of his best scores, in my opinion. Also, the second influence I had was one that isn't generally associated with orchestral music as much, and that was synth pop, specifically 80s synth pop and Italo disco, that sort of electronic music. I think the reason why I wanted to use that as an influence was because, despite the fact that it was written now almost 40 years ago, it has a very futuristic sound. And like when you go and watch a sci-fi film like Blade Runner or even the new Blade Runner 2049, that synth sound palette creates quite a futuristic world. So I listened to a lot of synth music and almost stole a very typical bass line of that style of music, which I've put in my piece. So in terms of showing you my inspiration, I'm wondering whether I should just drop a YouTube link, and maybe that might be the best way to share it with everyone. So I mentioned earlier that I really like Queen, and one of my favorite things Queen ever put out. It's maybe not their most popular one, generally speaking, but they wrote a soundtrack to the film Flash Gordon.
Oh yes.
And it's absolutely fantastic. It's got some great synthesizer work. And so this is a piece of music that plays in the first sort of action scene of the film, where the main character is having a bit of a clash with a bunch of other villains. See if this link works here. So that sort of anthemic quality that synth music has, I wanted to try and tap into. So the melody and the process I used to write was I actually started with those synthesized sounds. I had a brassy synth patch on my program, and I just improvised ideas until I came up with something which I felt captured that feel. And then from there, I sort of expanded it into an orchestrated setting. Yeah, so that's my piece.